Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Narayanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Narayanaya. Shuklam Bharadram Vitnum Sachibannam Chaturbhujam Prasanna Vadanam Dhyayet Sarva Vignopashantaye Ananta Samsara Samudratara Naukayitabhyam Guru Bhaktidabhyam Vairagya Samrajyada Pujanabhyam Namo Namah Shri Guru Padukabhyam Anjananandanam Veeram Janaki Shokanashanam Kabishamakshaham Taram Vande Lanka Bhayankaram Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopakumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha. Yadangri Pangeru Karenu Lagnam Nipiyaniyam Nipiyaniram Vimalantarangaha Janami Tattvam Nijamatma Rupam Tam Naumi Narayana Tirthamaryam. Hare Krishna Gurvairappa. Namaskaram. In session 22, we saw Narayana Tirtha concluding the second Tarangam with Yashoda praising the little Krishna as Sakshat Govinda. The song Govinda Gataya Paramanandam Amritamiha Sri Nanda Tanaya Bahu Yogindra Sura Vinuta has been popular for 100 years in the Sankirtanam tradition of the South. The Virat Purusha became Yashoda's little son, once again making Yashoda forget that she ever had Virat Rupa Darshanam. And such change happened by Krishna Maya again. We also then saw the questions of Parikshit and convincing answers of Sukha as to why Narada and Yashoda were so special and so exalted to be Nitya Siddha and not Sadhana Siddha as Devaki and Vasudeva. Some of the Satsangam devotees had raised a question and one asked some clarification and in general wanted some more information on the subtleties of the terms Nitya Siddha and Sadhana Siddha, since I mentioned only those two terms in the prior lectures. In our Sanatana Dharma philosophy, the role of a guru in defining the three ways for perfection is paramount. Those are Sadhana Siddha, perfection attained by bhakti or devotional service, strictly adhered to for spiritual guidance. Nitya Siddha is eternal perfection attained by never forgetting Paramatman or Purnavatara Krishna at any time. And of course, there is one more term, Kripa Siddha. Kripa Siddha is actually perfection conferred by Guru's mercy or the kataksham of another Vaishnava. Chaitanya Charitamrita mentions and also elaborates on these terms in Adi Leela, chapter 8. Sadhana Siddha, Nitya Siddha and Kripa Siddha. I may have mentioned that Krishnadasa Kaviraja Goswami, who belonged to the 15th century, that is, he was born in 1496, and he is reported to have done the great work Chaitanya Charitamrita in 1557. It was a biography on Kaviraja Goswami's guru, namely Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Kaviraja was also a contemporary of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu because Mahaprabhu was born in 1486 and he lived through 1533. Kaviraja was born 10 years after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and he became his disciple. And hence a great work Chaitanya Charitamrita by Kaviraja Goswami on Chaitanya Prabhu. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is considered by Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya to be an incarnation of both Radha and Krishna combined in one form. It is believed that Sri Krishna himself incarnated in Kali as Chaitanya Prabhu to propagate the power of Nama Sankirtanam as the ultimate upaya for reaching Brahman, which I may have clarified in many times in my Sankirtanam performances. Kaviraja Goswami clarified that Kripa Siddha is the state of perfection attained by the mercy of Acharyas. This mercy does not depend on the qualifications of a devotee. By such mercy, even a devotee who is dumb can speak, or an ignoramus can write to glorify the Lord splendidly, and a lame one can run and cross mountains, and someone who is born blind can see the stars in the sky. This is actually the definition of Kripa Siddha, something, the state of perfection that's attained purely by the mercy of Acharyas. There are a myriad anecdotal examples of Kripa Siddha. Thiruvaiyaru was a military commander, a chieftain turned a robber, albeit with the sole purpose of service to poor and the Lord. Thiruvaiyaru was blessed by Shiva Narayana to reach the exalted status of a Kripa Siddha. However, of course, becoming an example of one of the greatest of sadhana siddhas in due course in his life. But we often relate to the story of Prahlada Maharaja, who was, or I should say who is, not an ordinary devotee, because he is eternally present. Prahlada is Nitya Siddha. Narada is yet another example of Nitya Siddha, who from birth developed all the characteristics of possessing Ashtasiddhi. So the ecstasies of becoming an Ekagra Manasa blended with the total attention are not automatic. For us mortals to reach that state may take millions of years, if not millions of births. Sometime in early 1977, a few months before Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who came in the tradition of Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, it was, I think, in November of 1977, he reached Krishna's lotus feet. But maybe a few months before that, he was asked a question by a devotee on Chaitanya Charitamrita, especially to detail the three kinds of siddhas which I just mentioned. More specifically on types of Kripa Siddha and examples for understanding by mundane folks like me. Swami Prabhupada is reportedly he has this saying about this Kripasiddha. Swami said the great poet Rabindranath Tagore was honored as the Doctor of Letters by Oxford University decades ago. This was way back in 1977 when Prabhupada talked about this. So Prabhupada continued saying, Tagore never went to any school, but he got the title doctor from Oxford, Dr. Rabindranath Tagore. And if you all hastily conclude that I can also get a doctorate of letters or education without going to school, that would be abject foolishness and mockery. Prabhupada continued that. And he said, it happened to Tagore because he was so special. Similarly, don't try to imitate someone else hoping for the same result or honor or title. Follow the general course of rules, laws, regulations to attain sadhana siddhi, because that's the proper upayam for your eternal goal. Follow those as instructed in the Shastras, and yes, there are so many Shastras and so confusing for mortals. That is why you need a guru to guide you through the correct path, so that that guru can put you in the road of sadhana siddhi. If you are lucky and you happen to get the kripa siddhi, it is different, but your attainment should be towards sadhana siddhi goals. So Prabhupada continued, even for those considered nitya siddha or kripa siddha, he or she should not neglect the general regulative principle or code, the code of conduct. Don't neglect your dharma. Remember Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Sakshat Krishna himself, who was incarnated in Kali Yuga with a purpose. He was God. But he showed the way of Siddhi by accepting a guru. He accepted Ishvara Puri as his own guru. That is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He did not need a guru, but he accepted a guru. Even the Purnavatara Parabrahman Krishna himself accepted his guru, Sandipani Muni. Is it that Krishna needed any preceptor? Because he is a Brahman per se. But he still had a guru, Sandipani Guru. Teaching all of us that without a guru, your aim, your path, your goals are absolutely useless. That is why we have the famous Vakyam, Adau Gurvashrayam. In our Sanatana Dharma Parampara, we use the word Vaishnava Parampara. Vaishnava Parampara should not be misunderstood as in the modern world people use it for parochial division. What is Vaishnava Parampara? It is actually Vedic Parampara is known as Vaishnava Parampara because ultimately this Parampara people have only one goal, that reaching Vishnu is the goal. So it is Vaishnava Parampara or Vedic Parampara. As per that, Adav Gurvashrayam is the essential requirement for any pursuit. To enter into the spiritual life, first and foremost rule is to accept a guru. Look at all Puranas and the greatest of saints. Look at Veda Vyasa and his wonderful literature. Whichever way you directly turn your attention to in Sanatana Dharma, it is all the works of Veda Vyasa which we are blessed today to know what is the code of conduct. Be it Puranas or epics or Brahma Sutra or whatever you want to call. We are reading Bhagavad Gita. Let us go to one simple work, namely Bhagavad Gita. It is Vyasa Mahamuni's literature of Krishna's teachings. Vyasa Mahamuni wrote it as he heard them from his greatest guru Bhagavan Krishna as to Arjuna and then scribed it. Even for such a Mahan who practically gave us Krishna's Bhagavad Gita for mortals, he had his guru. So this profound digression is essential because it all triggered from Nitya Siddha, Sadhana Siddha, Kripa Siddha, etc. But this also triggers us to reach out to Mundakopanishad, which clarifies the relationship between Brahman and Guru, because in order to attain Brahman, you have to have a sadhana siddhi. In order to have sadhana siddhi, you need not only the education but the guidance of a guru to pick what exactly has to be read and how to really become a sadhana siddha. Unless you are very rarely lucky to become a kripa siddha and then move on to the tradition of sadhana siddha. But you don't become a nitya siddha just like that, because you are not Narada. So Mundaka explains the relationship between Brahman and Guru this way. Pariksha lokan karmachitane brahmano nirvedamayat nastya kritaha kritena tad vijnanartam sa gurumeva abhigachet samitpanihi stotriyam brahmanishtam. Mundaka, the second Mundaka says, Pariksha lokan karmachitan brahmano nirvedayamat Natsyakrataha kritena tad vijnanartam sa gurumeva abhigachet samitpanihi stotriyam brahmanishtam. The Anvaya of this Mundaka Vakyam should be slightly modified like this. Karmachitan lokan pariksha brahmanaha nirvedam ayad kritena akrataha na asti tat vijnanartam sa samitpanihi stotriyam brahmanittam gurumeva abhigachet. Let me explain to you why this Anvayam is important. Purely going by the Anvaya, the meaning is, let a Brahmin who is the seeker of the Brahman, because the Brahmin is one who is constantly in search of Brahman. The seeker of Brahman, having examined the worlds piled up by karma, be free from desires. And the Brahmin muses, is there nothing eternal produced by karma? And in order to acquire the knowledge of the eternal, let that seeker, namely the Brahmin who seeks Brahman, he holds a samit in his hand and runs after to finally find the preceptor. Because the preceptor who is well versed in Vedas and centered on Brahman is the only person who can show him the way. So Mundaka's explanation here is, Brahmanishtam means one who is centered in the Brahman, devoid of attributes and without a second, after renouncing all karma. Why? Since one performing karma cannot be centered in the Brahman on account of the antagonism between karma and the knowledge of the Atman. It's pretty simple. Having duly approached the Guru, let the seeker propitiate him and question him about the true and immortal Purusha, namely the Brahman. Karmachitan lokan pariksha brahmanaha nirvedam ayat kritena akrataha anastitati vijnanartam sa samitpanihi brahmanishtam stotriyam gurumeva abhigachet. Since most of you have been regulars in this satsangam for almost 2 years now, you may have known my repeated references to the basis of definitions of who is a Vaishnava, what is a Vaishnava philosophy, and the answer to the question, and who is a Brahmin, what is the definition, as strictly derived from the Vedic tenets and scriptural pramanam, not the mundane parochial definitions of Vaishnava or mundane parochial definitions of a Brahmin. It suffices to say that those nomenclature are based on observances and not on birthrights. Let me digress a bit based on Prabhupada's reference on Tagore and Oxford conferring the doctorate on Tagore. Rabindranath was very unique in carving out his own destiny. Many of you may be aware, Tagore was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1913. He was a Nobel laureate in literature for his work Gitanjali, a collection of verses where he writes Deliverance is not for me in renunciation. I feel the embrace of freedom in 1,000 bonds of delight. These are all Tagore's famous quotes. Many an educated elite at that point in time derided him for such candid statements of global reach, more out of jealousy than out of any convincing counter arguments or meaningful challenges for Tagore. That often happens even today. Tagore's childhood was one that bound him to the institutional norms of privilege. He was confined entirely to Tagore Mansion in Calcutta, where he was educated in the control of generally harsh servants with a punishing schedule of private lessons. Tagore rarely saw his parents, and he attended at least 4 schools over 7 years. He finished that period with a complete lack of distinction in studies. He developed a commentary on his early experience of schooling and rote learning. I mean, rote learning meaning R-O-T-E, rote, is completely mechanical and habitual repetition. That is why we call it regurgitation most of the time. In Tamil, we say notru podrathu. Most of our early education in those years used to be based on memorizing and spitting it at the exam time. Rote learning, which happens even today in many a part of the world over. Before Tagore decided to start his own school system. Tagore, also known as Vishwakavi. Vishwakavi is Vishwakavi, world poet. Ignored his formal education and turned to creative members of his family. One of many examples in the modern times is Bill Gates. He too dropped out of Harvard University, but is the most sought after in the world for doctorates by several distinguished universities, highest honors, titles of various countries in the world. That means these should not be construed as youngsters as a ruse for discontinuing formal studies. Most of you are also aware of Cho Ramaswamy, an eminent Indian political satirist and one of the legendary journalists and writers in English as well as in Tamil, and who challenged the established for all the right reasons, that too fearlessly. He wrote simplified books and short treatises and great epics and Puranas for common men. He wrote books on Ramayanam, Mahabharatam, Sanatana Dharma, books on who is a Hindu, who is a Brahmin, etc., etc. Those who could not digest the power of truth in his writing, as well as orations, called him a buffoon. But the learned ones respected him, if not revered, at least privately, for his candid wisdom. He passed away in December of 2016, but ironically only in 2015 did he make some earth-shaking but very appropriate comments about how titles and honors often get conferred in India on unworthy humans for reasons of money, politics, and for all other reasons apparent and often non-discernible. He even refused to accept a Padma Shri award, citing those very reasons before his death. As irony would have it, within a month of his passing, he was awarded posthumously with the Padma Bhushan award, one step above. You can guess why. Oftentimes, institutional governmental titular roles are conferred for reasons often unknown. We also see illiterate politicians, thugs and business folks with questionable ethics and artists of questionable merits often getting conferred doctorates and sometimes self-conferred doctorates from the universities that they themselves create with money, and that too money, ill-gotten wealth, and run politically for more money. My intention is not to digress into this kind of painful truth. But this may be the background of why Prabhupada elaborately highlighted the specific irony when he mentioned about Kripa Siddha. He went so elaborate, saying how only an honorable human being can ever become Kripa Siddha. Not by simple conferring on corrupt means. Under Kripa Siddha gets that when he follows the righteous path without that expectation that he is going to become a Siddha and becomes venerable with Acharyas or divine grace. Great examples of Valmiki, Kalidasa, and a myriad great men and women and Acharyas of all stripes and shades who were blessed by Bhagavan himself directly in their lifetime, they all became Kripa Siddhas. Some didn't stop there. They went through their sadhana siddhi to the highest platform. Last week we moved on to the Tarangam 3 with Tirtha giving us the summary of Leela to be addressed in that part of the opera. We enjoyed the famous Geetam Aloke Sri Balakrishnam Sakhi Ananda Sundara Tandava Krishnam, sung by the Devanganas, the divine women, and how Tirtha moved on to describing the little cowherd Krishna faithfully doing the duties of a cowherd. The observing celestials who were watching from their flying celestial planes sang their praise in the rare Geetam Kalayata Gopi Karunya Rasapura Kala Megabhiramam. Kalayata Gopi Karunya Rasapura Kala Megabhiramam, rarely heard in decades. And that song also we happen to listen. Naratirtha seems overwhelmed by the ecstasy of the celestials that he follows up with a prelude of how the celestials continued their additional praise in Slokam 74. Yajnam Yajnabhujam Vishnum Gopabalaihi Samanvidam Tadhyanna Purna Shikdyadehi Jaguhu Vaimanikavane. So Slokam 74 and Geetam 29, which is going to be in a Ragamalika tuned by us. This is also one of the rarest Geetams, not often sung. We are going to listen to these now. Yajnam Yajnabhujam Vishnum Gopabalai Samanvitam Yajnam Yajnabhujam Vishnum Yajnam Yajnabhujam Vishnum Gopabalai Samanvitam Dadhyanna Purna Shikyadyehi Dadhyanna Purna Shikyadyehi Jagurvaimanikavane Jagurvaimanikavane Pashyata Pashyata Bhagavantam Pashyata Pashyata Bhagavantam Pashyata Pashyata Bhagavantam Gopa Balakashikam Apagarantam Pashyata Pashyata Bhagavantam Gopa Balakashikam Apagarantam Pashyata Pashyata Bhagavantam Rashyadavala Dadi Milidana Purita Rashyadavala Dadi Milidana Purita Rashyadavala Milidana Purita Rashyadavala Dadi Milidana Purita Ramaniya Kalasha Vijayajasritam Ramaniya Kalasha Vijayajasritam Pashyata Pashyata பகவந்தம் சரமாருத மலய மானச சமவேக சரமாருத மலய மானச சமவேக சரமாருத மலய மானச சமவேகவந்தம் சதகோடி கோபபாலம் அவிதாடயந்தம் சதகோடி கோபபாலம் அவிதாடயந்தம் Choruchirapanigas Sudhamukirata Choruchirapanigas Sudhamukiratam Suralokavanidaganam Akashayandam Suralokavanidaganam Akashayandam Pachadapaya Bhagavantam Pachadapaya Bhagavantam Gopa Balakashikyam Avarantam Pachadapaya Chaka Mrigalangananu Karana Chaturam Chaka Mrigalangananu Karana Chaturam Chama Sundarakaram Atula Vigaram Chama Sundarakaram Atula Vigaram Akila Lokadaram Igavachanucharam Akila Lokadar Igavachanucharo Adhika Saga Sosaga Paramudaro Adhika Saga Sosaga Paramudaro Adhika Saga Sosaga Paramudaro Pashyata Pashyata Bhagavantam Gopa Balakashikyam Apagarandam Pashyata Pashyata Pranaya Kalaga Kolagalam Pranaya Kalaga Kolagalam Atisaradam Pragadita Nija Parama Nandavilasam Pranaya Kalaga Kolagalam Atisaradam Pragadita Nija Parama Nandavilasam Vanita Kinkini Gana Gana Lalita Lasyam Vanita Kinkini Gana Gana Lalita Lasyam Kwapi Madhu Madhurati Darasajam Kwapi Madhu Madhurati Darasajam Pashyata Pashyata Bhagavantam Pashyata Pashyata Bhagavantam Gopa Balakashikyam Apagarantam Pashyata Pashyata Sarasamasrunakabalam Igatu Bunjanano Sarasamasrunakabalam Igatu Bunjanam Sabala Sakala Kopam Akila Nidanam Sabala Sakala Kopam Akila Nidanam Tarala Kundalavaram Adinarmagajam Tarala Kunda ஆதிநர்மகாசோ வரநாராயண தீர்த்த ஹிருதய விலாசம் கரட குண்டலஹாரம் ஆதிநர்மகாசம் வரநாராயண தீர்த்த ஹிருதய விலாசோ பஷ்யத பஷ்யத பகவந்தம் கோப பாலகசீக்யம் அபகரந்தோ பஷ்யத பஷ்யத பகவந்த கோப பாலக பகவந்த பகவந்தம். In the opera, Tirtha takes us from this point on direct to the episode and samharam of Aghasura, the demon who was one of Kamsa's generals and the elder brother of the demoness Putana and demon Bakasura. Since we decided in the beginning that in the series of reenactment of Krishna Leela, albeit through Tarangini, it should at least mention the various Leelas in sequence, we will take up help from Sukha Bhagavatam and briefly recount the incidents after Damodara's deliverance of the sons of Kubera. From that point on, we will take the help of Bhagavatam because Narana Tirtha has been pretty silent. The children of Gokulam properly described to Nanda and other Gopas as to how everything had happened leading to the breaking of the huge trees from where two exquisitely looking great Deva Purushas emerged. But the elders could not believe the story. Some of them, however, hesitated to think that it might be true, since they had already seen many such wonderful incidents in connection with little Krishna. Anyway, Nanda Maharaja immediately released Krishna from the robes. So Damodara once again became little Krishna, moving around with everybody. Bhagavatam says, right after this, one day a fruit vendor approached Nanda Maharaja's house. And Krishna gathered some food grains with his little palms and went to the vendor to exchange the grains for fruit. On the way, almost all the grain fell from his palms with only one or two bits, grains remaining. But the fruit vendor, out of total love for little Krishna, accepted those few grains in exchange for as much fruit as Krishna would like to have or could take in his hands. As soon as the fruit vendor did this, and as soon as Krishna touched that basket and took the fruits, the basket became filled with gold and jewels. Srimad Bhagavatam chapter 11 says, Phalavikriyani tasyachyuta dhanya karadvayam Phalaihi aporayad ratnaihi phalabandam apuricha. This Leela of little Krishna is seen in the meaning of the profound Gita Vakyam. Patram pushpam phalam toyam yome bhaktya prayachati. Tadaham bhakti upagritamashnaami prayatatmanaha. This is Bhagavad Gita chapter 9. If one offers me with love and devotion a single leaf of any kind, a flower, it doesn't have to be this flower, that flower, any flower, one fruit, whether bitter or nice or sweet or whatever it is, a leaf, a flower, some fruit or water. If nothing is available, at least give me a udruni of water. Patram pushpam palam toyam yome bhaktya prayachati. Anybody gives me with love, பக்தியோடு எதை கொடுத்தாலும் நான் ஏற்றுக்கொள்ளுகிறேன். I will accept it. ததஹம் பக்தி உபகிருதமஸ்னாமி. In fact, you may have heard this, the pearl from Tirumandiram. யாவர்க்குமாம் இறைவிற்கு ஒரு பச்சிலை, யாவர்க்குமாம் பசுவிற்கு ஒரு வாயுரை, யாவர்க்குமாம் உண்ணும்போது ஒரு கைப்பிடி, யாவர்க்குமாம் பிறர்க்கு ஒரு இன்னுரைதானே. யாவர்க்குமாம் இறைவர்க்கு ஒரு பச்சிலை, யாவர்க்குமாம் பசுவிற்கு ஒரு வாயுரை, அட்லீஸ்ட் அ பிளேட் ஆஃப் கிராஸ். உண்ணும்போது ஒரு கைப்பிடி, பிறர்க்கு ஒரு இன்னுரை தானே. நத்திங் இஸ் பாசிபிள், அட்லீஸ்ட் சே சம் ஸ்வீட் வேர்ட்ஸ். What is Daivika Dharmam is explained in very simple terms by Thirumular in his Thirumandiram. Thirumular is considered as one of the Ashtadasha Siddhas, 18 Siddhas, and one of the 63 Nayanmars of extraordinary repute. Aside from the controversy as to the age or time of Thirumular, generally he is believed to be around the 8th century Common Era, and he gave us 3,000 pearls of wisdom known as Thirumandiram. Thirumular is the one who gave the maxim which most of you may be familiar with. Anbum Shivanam Irandanbar Arivilar, Anbe Shivam Avadarkum Arihilar, Anbe Shivam Avadahum Arindapin, Anbe Shivamai Amarndirundare. Anbum Shivam Irandanbar Arivilar, Anbe Shivam Avadarkum Arihilar, அன்பே சிவம் ஆவதாகும் அறிந்த பின் அன்பே சிவமாய் அமர்ந்திருந்தாரே. யத்கரோஷி யதஸ்நாசி யஜ்ஜுகோஷி ததாசி யத் யத் தபஸ்யசி கௌந்தேய தத் குருஷ்வ மத் அர்ப்பணம். மதர்ப்பணம். Bhagavad Gita chapter 9. To the confused and questioning Arjuna, Krishna clarified further. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer or give away, and whatever austerities you perform, do that, O son of Kunti, as an offering to me. When I mentioned this in yet another forum a few years ago, someone asked me whether such an abstract statement can be simplified for extant use. I told him that there was nothing abstract about that. When my mother, as I observed her some 70 years ago, used to cook, whether for 6 or 8 or 10 people at home or visitors, 20 people at home, for whatever number, any variety of food that was cooked, she used to add the ingredients, including spices, with a Narayana, take it as my offering. Bhagavane Narayana ellam onake. This is how our mothers and older people used to do the cooking, not by constantly tasting. Nowadays, we have a few thousand YouTube instructions for the simplest form of cooking or simplest of dishes by self-acclaimed experts, and many youngsters of the modern times faithfully follow these instructions in YouTube, unfortunately with measuring cups and scales, etc., etc. And don't ask me what will be the ultimate product, but the earlier generations knew the technique, even though they were not experts in the above Gita Vakyams. By simply offering everything to Bhagavan, the food tasted always great. Yat karoshi yadasnasi, yat juhoshi dadasi yat, yat tapasyasi kaunteya tat kurushva madarpanam. Every Acharya said the same thing. யாவர்க்குமாம் இறைவர்க்கு ஒரு பச்சிலை, பசுவிற்கு ஒரு வாயிரை, உண்ணும்போது கைப்பிடி, பிறர்க்கு ஒரு இன்னுரை தானே. If everything else fails, at least be nice to people by giving them a couple of very sweet words. Getting back to Krishna Leela, let's get back to Krishna Leela. Sukha says in chapter 11 that by then all the elderly Gopas congregated and persuaded Nanda that they leave Gokulam because they have seen a lot of disturbances and a lot of threats to little Krishna and Rama that could not be easily ignored. They decided to go to Vrindavana, Vrajadama, and the next day they all departed. In Vrindavana, both Krishna and Balarama, after finishing their childhood Leela, began to take charge of the calves and send them to healthy pasturing grounds. The Gopa clan under the captaincy of Nanda settled down in Vrindavana, and the little cowherd boys, to the delight of everyone around, visibly enjoyed the relocation and the environment. Sukha uses several slokams to narrate this migration to Vrindavana, but we mentioned just a couple of slokams which are interesting. Kvachit vadayato venum kshepanaihi shipataha kvachit 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 padaihi kinkinibihi kvachit kutrimag govrushaihi vrushayamanau nardhantev yuyudate parasparam anukrutya rutaihi jantum cheratuhu prakritau yata. Slokas 39 and 40 of chapter 11 in Canto 10, it talks about the migration, beautiful migration. Sometimes Krishna and Balarama would play on their flutes. Sometimes they would throw ropes and stones devised for getting fruits from the trees en route to Vrindavana. Sometimes they would throw only stones, and sometimes just for the fun of it, not for fruits. Their ankle bells tinkling, they would play football with fruits like, bale. Bale is that wood apple, and amalaki. So these were common fruits there. Sometimes they would cover themselves with blankets and imitate cows and bulls and fight with one another. They will roar loudly. Sometimes they would imitate the voices of the animals. In fact, the terms that they are used here, anukritya rutaihi jantum, it's mimicking them and behaving like the animals themselves by doing some duel. In this way, they enjoyed sporting exactly like two ordinary human children, not as incarnation of Paramatman. In fact, mimicking the sounds of various birds and animals, when the usage is anukritya rutaihi jantum, there is a very nice ashtakam called Goswami Ashtakam. It gives meaning to such expressions in Slokam 5. Kujad kokila hamsa sarasa gunakarnaihi mayurakule nana ratna nibaddha moola vitapa sri yugda vrindavane Radha Krishnam aharnisham prabhajatau jivartadau yau muda vande rupa sanatanau Raghu Yugo Sri Jiva Gopalakau. In Vrindavana, which is resonant with the calls of Kujat Kokila Hamsa Sarasa. Koils, they are like cuckoo birds. And then swans and cranes, and filled with peacocks and beautified by trees decorated with various. These trees, they look as though they are decorated by jewels at their bases. So exquisite. They serve Radha and Krishna day and night and joyfully fulfill all souls' desires who witness such scenes. I offer my obeisance to the various Swamis of the tradition, Sri Rupa, Sri Sanatana, Sri Raghunath Bhatta, Sri Raghunath Dasa, Sri Jiva, Sri Gopala. All these are mentioned for Goswami. In Goswami Ashtakam, this is the praise of all the Acharyas who came in the Gaudiya tradition. But there is mention about how the Vrindavana was filled with all these animals. During this time, a demon named Vatsasura entered among the calves. Tam Vatsarupinam Viksha Vatsa Yutagatam Harihi Darsayan Baladevaya Shanaihi Mugda Ivasadat. When Krishna saw that the demon had assumed the form of a calf and entered among the groups of other calves, he pointed to Baladeva, "Here is another demon," and very slowly approached the demon as though the Mayavi did not understand the intentions of the Asura. The same chapter 11, in the next sloka in Srimad Bhagavatam, Grihitva aparapadapyam sakalangulam achyuta brahmayitva kapittagre prahinot gata jivitam sakapittaihi mahakayaha patyamanaihi papatha. Thereafter, Krishna caught the demon by the hind legs and tail and twirled the demon's whole body very strongly until the demon was dead, and threw him into the top of a kapita tree. In Tamil, they say the usually they have something called the undi will, a rope and some kind of a contraption which holds a stone. Like that, Bhagavan Krishna was holding the demon by the one leg and one tail and then rolled it up. Finally, he bashed it against kapita. Kapita means wood apple or elephant apple, we call it vilambaram. Which finally, of course, the body fell down along with the body of the demon. Even the fruits also fell down, even the tree fell down. And the demon had assumed a great form. Paritranaya sadhunam vinasaya sa dushkritam. In Bhagavad Gita 4, chapter 4, Krishna's daily business here in this material world was to kill the dushkritis. That's the purpose of his birth in Dwapara Yugam. This did not hamper his daily affairs since it was his routine. While he tended the calves on the bank of the river Yamuna, 2 or 3 incidents almost took place as a routine every day, and although these were all serious, killing the demons one after the other appeared to be his daily routine because that's the purpose of his avatar also. Te tata dadushuhu bala mahasatvam avastitam tatrasuhu vrajanirbhinnam girehe shankamivachyutam. Right by the side of the reservoir where they came for a drink, the boys then saw a gigantic living being resembling a mountain peak broken into 2 and struck down by a thunderbolt. The boys were afraid even to see such a living being. Even the very sight gave them such a scare. Savai bako nama mahan asuro bakarupadruk agatya sagasa krishnam tikshna tundo kraha tundo agrasid bali. The great-bodied demon was Bakasura. He had assumed the body of, call it a duck or a crane, with a very sharp beak. And imagine the huge size. He simply swallowed Krishna when he came close to him. When the boys and Baladeva were witnessing this, they swooned right away at the sight. But as for Krishna is concerned, he became a burning fire in Baka's stomach. Whereupon the Asura could not keep him inside, so he spat him out. That was when Krishna, in an aggressive fight with Baka, killed him by tearing him by the beak. He just got out, tore him apart through the beak. Tam apatantam sa nigrihya tundayo dorbhyam bakam kamsak sakam satampatihi pasyatsu baleshu dadara leelaya mudavaho veeranavad Devaukasam. Krishna saw Bakasura, the friend of Kamsa, endeavoring to attack him once again. He captured with his tender hands the demon by the 2 halves of the beak and easily bifurcated him. Just like a child usually splits a blade of Virana grass. That is the simile given by Sukha here. No wonder this pleased the denizens of the heaven. The celestials were so wonderfully pleased that they started showering flour on Krishna and Krishna's friends there for the Bakasura Vadam. The playmates of Krishna, including Balarama, returning in the evening to their homes, narrated all these stories to Nanda Maharaja and all their parents. The mothers could not believe their children. Krishna's playmates tried their best to explain, but because of their love, which was not allowing them to go past the maternal love, and concerns for small boys and the perils that they constantly faced, the mothers were saying, okay, you're all making stuff, go away. Let us now revert to the opera and see how Narana Tirtha narrates next about a significant samharam on which Sukha spends a whole chapter 12 with 44 slokams. First, we will listen to slokams 75, 76 and 77, where Tirtha explains that the Gopalakas who followed Krishna were swallowed by Aghasura and how they prayed to Krishna for the deliverance through Geetam 30 that follows the slokams. So we will listen to them in sequence 75, 76 and 77 and then the Geetam 30, which is a benediction. Anitam shikya bandastam dadjannam gopabalakaihi आनीतं शिक्यभाण्डस्थं दप्त्यन्नं गोपबालकैः भुक्त्वा वनेचरन् कृष्णः भुक्त्वा वनेचरन् कृष्णः त्वगासुर भुक्त्वा वनेचरन् कृष्णः त्वगासुरमुखं ययो अगासुरं काविष्टाः सवत्स गोपबालकाः प्राप्तमोहापनुत्यर्थं प्रार्थयन्तो जगुहरिम् परमकरुणया मां पालयत्वां प्रपन्नं निजपरिजनकामम् परमकरुणया मां पालय त्वां प्रपन्नं निजपरिजनकामम् पूरय अचिन्त्यकीर्ते निरवधिककृपाब्धे निर्मलानन्दमूर्ते भवजलधि निमग्नं दीनम् उद्धारयेश निरवधिककृपाब्धे निर्मलानन्दमूर्ते भवजलधि निमग्नं दीनम् उद्धारयेश उद्धारयेश परमकरुणया मां पालय परमकरुणया मां पालय कृष्ण भक्तमनोरथं पूरय परमकरुणया मां पालय कृष्ण भक्तमनोरथं पूरय परिपन्थि गणनिग वारय कृष्ण परिपङ्क्ति गणनिग वारय कृष्ण भवसागरपतितं तारय भवसागरपतितं तारय भवसागरपतितं तारय परम करुणय पालय मधुकैटवादी विजयाधर कृष्ण मधुकैटवादी विजयाधर कृष्ण मध्यकुर्मादिरूप सादर मधुकैटवादी विजयाधर कृष्ण मध्यकुर्मादिरूप सादर अधिकदयापलोक सुन्दर कृष्ण अपविविदानन्द सागर अपविविदानन्द सागर परम करुणया मां पालय भक्तमनोरथं पूरय अखिलाण्डकोटि परिपालका कृष्ण अनवद्य गोकुल नायक कृष्ण अगहरण दुड्डनि वारक कृष्ण अगहरण दुड्डनि वारक कृष्ण आश्रित जन आपदुद्धारक कृष्ण आश्रित जन आपदुद्धारक कृष्ण परम करुणया भक्तमनोरथं पूरय तरलमणिमकर कुण्डल कृष्ण ताण्डव नटन कृत मंडल सरस परिपालिता कंडल कृष्ण साधु गो தண்டல கிருஷ்ணா பரம கருணையாமம் வதய கிருஷ்ணா பக்தமோரதம் ஊரய அவனி மண்டல பார கண்டன கிருஷ்ணா ஆசிரித ஜன ஹிருதய மண்டன ಧ್ರುವ ವಿಭೂತಿ ದಾನ ವಿಚಕ್ಷಣ ಕೃಷ್ಣ ಧ್ರುವ ವಿಭೂತಿ ದಾನ ವಿಚಕ್ಷಣ ಕೃಷ್ಣ ಶಿವನಾರಾಯಣ ತೀರ್ಥ ರಕ್ಷಣ ಕೃಷ್ಣ ಶಿವನಾರಾಯಣ ತೀರ್ಥ ಪರಮ ಕರುಣಯ ಮಾಂ ಪಾಲಯ As I said earlier, Tirtha offered these 3 slokams and a Geetam as a plea from Gopalas from inside Agasura. Actually, the Gopala Balas are supposedly singing from within the stomach of Agasura for the deliverance by their friend Krishna. We will see in the next session all about that, a significant samharam, on which Sukha spends a whole chapter 12 with 44 slokams, as I mentioned earlier. To those who may be curious as to why Tirtha sang in slokam 77, Mam Pala Yadyenam Uddhara Yesa, we will address that aspect in the next session. Narayana 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 Hare Krishna Guruvayurappa Narayana Narayana